It's 1 o'clock, so we'll begin our meeting. I'd like to welcome Denis Malone, who's the Senior Planner for Kilkenny County Council. This presentation today will look at our county development plan, and this was suggested by Councillor Martin Brett, our member. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome you, Denis. Thank you for making the time available. Just can I ask you, first of all, why do county councils individually set up a county development plan?
Why do they do it individually? Well, I suppose under the planning legislation, it's a statutory duty. So they have to make a plan for their administrative area. And that has to be reviewed every 6 years. So that goes back to 1963 when the legislation was brought in first. And they were given, I think, 3 years to make the first one. So I think the first Kilkenny plan appeared around 1967, thereabouts, and it's been rolling on ever since. So you would have had, going back from the present plan, the last plan was 2014, one that was 2008, 2002, 1998, if I remember correctly, and then so on back 1980, goes back to more or less every 6 years. So the 6-year review has been brought in as a guillotine process since 2000, since the year 2000. And prior to that, it was possible to get the minister to extend the period of the plan. So you had some plans running for 6 years, some running for 8 years, depending on the resources that councils put into them. But since 2000, you're given a statutory time frame which to work, which is 99 weeks from the start of the process to the end of the process. And if you haven't completed the process after 99 weeks, there's a guillotine comes down, and as much as the plan that's prepared at that time becomes the plan. So it's a statutory function of each local authority to prepare a development plan.
Right. And how aspirational are they? I mean, are they rooted in what's actually feasible, or are they aspirational?
Well, they're a bit of both, I suppose, but in the past, what you'll find is that plans were very aspirational. And what the government are trying to do is to move local authorities to a more performance-based approach. So looking at measurable metrics. So for instance, in the current draft plan that's out there, the big theme has been climate change and the impacts of that. So measurables will be in the next 6 years, modal shift, the amount of energy being generated by renewable resources. All these will be metrics for the performance of the plan in 6 years' time or 4 years' time. So, and like things like housing delivery. So the number of houses delivered in a period of time, and is that keeping pace with demand? So these are metrics that the government are moving towards constantly. And so, for instance, so if we set a target population in the plan, well, the metric will be, how many houses have you delivered over that period, and are you meeting your target? So if you take that in the context of, I'm moving into the contents of the thing, but if you take that on in terms of the delivery of housing units and how that is meeting your projected target so for growing the city by up to 30,000 people by 2027, how many houses does that equate to? Where are they going to be built? What's the land supply like? What's our zoning like? All that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that's where these metrics will come into play.
And how much will what the council has in its development plan depend on the private sector as opposed to what the council itself will be fully in charge of?
Well, we operate in a market economy.
Indeed.
So it doesn't have, so we're not a control economy like say in China or somewhere like that. So where you'll be told what to do and that's it. It's a different scenario here. So you're trying to write up a document that will allow, I suppose in a very simple way, that will allow what you want to happen. So good things, if you like, put it in that sense, good things, and things that you don't want to happen, not to happen. So trying to get a policy document together that will give you enough wriggle room to allow things to happen that you want to happen, but at the same time, not to allow things to happen that you don't want to happen.
Of course, yeah.
So what would be an example of that? So an example might be, so if we got a big retailer coming in and he said, well, I want to put a big retail development out beside Woody's. So what's in the policy? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? So the way the policy is written is we think it's a bad thing because we want to protect the vitality and the vibrancy of the town centre and places in the town. So if you put something out there that'll attract people away from the town centre and make an alternative destination, that might be a bad thing. So that's where your policy, that's the challenge, if you like, of trying to draft up a plan. What policies do you put in place or objectives that you put in place that will be a bulwark against that happening and direct investment where you want the investment to happen.
Right. Well, listen, you've put a lot of work into your presentation today, and I'd like to hand over to you now as you take us through that. And then perhaps when you're finished, we can have some questions from the people who are joining us today.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ian. So thanks for the opportunity, first of all, to the Rotary Club for letting me have a little talk. So it's, I know you have limited time, so I have about 12 or 13 slides that I'll run through fairly quickly and give you a quick overview of what we're doing. So I'm going to just cover 3 little topics there. What is a development plan, why it matters, and the process that we've gone through to date. So the purpose here is to sort of engage, explain and listen to you and maybe answer questions, as we said, at the end of the meeting. So what is the development plan? Well, it's the big overall spatial plan for the city and county. So just remember that it's about the spatial allocation of uses, so zoning and all that kind of stuff comes into it. And we're trying to direct investment into the areas that you want investment to happen, whether it be jobs, commercial stuff, all that kind of things. And let's say every 6 years, the current draft plan will cover the period 2021 to 2027. So hopefully we'll adopt the plan later in the summer sometime when we're through the process. And it sets a framework for future physical development. So that's what it's about, setting the framework for future physical development. So what does it look like? Well, in actual documentations, there's 2 volumes to the plan, an overarching county plan, and then a volume directed solely for the city. So the city being the largest urban area in the county, and traditionally it was its own planning authority at one stage until 2014, when the local authorities were amalgamated, or at least the borough council was abolished, and other local authorities were amalgamated and so on. So now it's part of the county council. Now is the planning authority for the city as well as the county, and then attached to that is a set of appendices, environmental reports. So in the appendices you get it's the nitty-gritty. It's for the nerdy people out there that want to go into the depths of the housing strategy and the figures around that, or the retail strategy and the figures around that, or the wind energy strategy and the rationale behind that. So those in themselves are quite weighty documents. So what's in the plan, I suppose? Well, it's broken into the main themes, and I've touched on some of this already. So a plan for reducing carbon emissions. So it's protecting rural communities, making them stronger, and what we should focus on about in creating jobs. How do we protect heritage and protect and improve the environment? How do we grow the city as a regional self-sustaining city? And how do you deliver a compact city, that concept of a compact city? So just in terms of Kilkenny City itself, I think it's the 8th largest employment base in the country. We have more jobs in the city than living in the population. So if we have a population of 20,000, about 50%, you need 50% of that for jobs. So if you have 20,000 people, you need about 10,000 jobs. So last census, we had 26,000 some odd hundred, and we'd well over 13,000 jobs in and around the city. And what's come to the prevalence, I suppose, in terms of carbon emissions is you'll see practically every week now there's something about climate change or carbon emissions. So you've seen programs like Ear to the Ground, Eco-Eye, and so on the TV, which cover these topics and the importance of that. So that's coming through from a national level. So you have the National Climate Change Plan, which is directing us towards this idea of a compact city and the idea of being able to reduce your carbon footprint by being able to get around your city in a sustainable way. So whether it's walking, cycling, public transport, and to minimize the use of the private car. So what's in the plan then? So all this is broken into various chapters and plans. So we have an overarching chapter on climate action, chapter on housing, rural development, open space, heritage and culture, infrastructure, environment, renewable energy, which is a big one, movement and mobility. And there's a set of maps to go with that, which talk about, allocate where the different objectives might be, particularly around the city. And I said the plan then is broken into a set of policies, some development management standards. So these are things that when you come to make the planning application for whatever, these development management standards are applied. And so that might be, say, at a very simple level, for a rural house, making sure that the entrance is safe and complies with the minimum safety requirements, that kind of thing. Right, shouldn't move that. And then integration of this into development, as I said, talking about compact growth, transport modal shifts. So one of the measurables that we talked about earlier, how do you measure this, will be, there certainly will be objective, or is an objective in the development plan to try and get people to shift their mode of transport. This is what I was talking about, particularly around the city, walking, cycling, public transport, and to move away from the necessity to use a car. So if you look at how a city is planned, so the more dispersed the different uses are, the greater the need to get into a car to go shopping or go to work or whatever. So this is one of the big things that will be part of this development plan, how you convince people to make that modal shift. And that feeds into the reduced carbon footprint, which feeds into the climate change agenda. And then buildings as well, housing to become more efficient. And that's mainly done through the likes of the building control mechanism. So building regulations, flood resilience, that's another climate change action. So how do we make our developments flood resilient? So not building on floodplains. And natural heritage and biodiversity, again, how do we protect biodiversity, enhance biodiversity? All our policies need to be around that. So again, simple example might be coming back to, again, development, particularly in the countryside, and the retention of hedgerows and so on, that are the mainstay of biodiversity. And then we have our renewable energy strategy. So how does the council promote, if you like, its fair share of renewable energy for the nation? So part of the challenge for a local authority is you have to look at the climate change agenda. So the government have said we want more renewable energy, and the main source of that will be wind energy, both onshore and offshore. So as a local authority, we have to devise a policy that will allow greater renewable energy to be generated by mainly wind, but other forms as well, such as bioenergy and so on. So that's all in the plan, in the draft plan. And as I said, renewable energy. So our ambition is that by 2030, we could see that electricity, the 100% of Kilkenny's electricity needs could be generated by renewable energy sources within the county. Now, that probably needs some refinement, and we will be talking to Three Colours Energy Agency around that and how you quantify that. So electricity needs to be probably defined a bit better. In terms of movement and mobility, then the graphic on the right there just explains, I suppose, what we mean by movement and mobility and where national, regional and local policy is taking us. So it's taken us from the first priority being pedestrians, second priority being cycling, third priority public transport, and the last of the priorities will be the private car. So again, if you're reading through the draft plan, you'll see lots of policies around the objectives for improving cycling and walking in not just the city, but in places like Thomastown and Callan and so on. So why is that important in terms of investment? Well, if you look at what the government are doing in terms of public investment, a lot of the investment, you see what was announced there over the last couple of weeks. You had 400 million being announced for Cork, I think was that last Friday. In the previous week, we had 28 million being announced for Carlow, Kilkenny. And look at where those projects were going. They were going into the urban areas. And there's, why is that important from a development plan perspective? Well, if you can show that your investment or your projects are related to the national agenda, well then there's a good chance you'll get investment and support for investment from the government through those various schemes that they have going, in terms of funding. So so that's why I suppose it's important that you know, at a national level, there's a national agenda around growth for the country, expanding the urban areas. So major growth is to happen in the 5 cities and in places like Kilkenny, which are seen as the next tier down from that, and is to plan around that and plan for that investment, deliver the services that are required for that expansion. So just in terms of the process that we have going, so we actually started this process way back in 2018, and between regional planning and COVID-19, the process was stalled in late 2018 until May of 2020, when the process recommenced. So we recommenced and we're currently at the draft public consultation. So we just finished the public display period. And you can see in the second line there, so the next thing is a chief executive report on those submissions. So I'll just give you a little flavour of that. So as part of the process, we held 4 public town hall meetings through Eventbrite and Microsoft Teams. So people could just register for the event on Eventbrite and tune in on the night. So we had good attendances ranging from 50 to 80 people, and we had an independent chair for the session, John Purser from KCLR. And there was fairly good engagement. Each session lasted about 2 hours, and as I said, we got there between 50 and 80 people. So registered for the event at any one time. So we actually had more registered, but some kind of dipped in and out on the nights. And then we did individual sessions with people like the Chamber of Commerce, the Older Persons Forum, the Youth through Cordan and the council's own members, as Martin Brett there, be familiar with that. To date, so it closed on the 12th of March, so we have 460 submissions have come in, and that's pretty good, I suppose. It's the downside of having a successful public consultation. That's been one of the highest I've ever seen in terms of public consultation around the development plan. So some of the next steps, I hope you can read it right in there. So the next steps will be, we have to do a chief executive report on those 460 submissions. So what that is each submission has to be summarized, the issues raised, and a recommendation from the chief executive as to what we should do with the recommendation, maybe make a change to the plan or whatever. So all those recommendations then go back to the council for potential amendments, and the councillors approve or disapprove or amend, and those amendments then go back out on public display for a further round of engagement, and that's for a much shorter period of just 4 weeks. And after that, there's a further chief executive report on that engagement, and then with a final adoption of the plan, hopefully around midsummer. So it could be July, but the timelines are a little bit variable on that. So there's certain time periods are cut off, but so we just keep an eye on, as I said at the start, our 99 weeks. So that finishes sometime in nearly September, but hopefully we'll have it adopted before that time. So that's a quick run through of where we are with the process and what the plan contains. So I just say thanks for listening, and if I'm sure people have questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer any questions or comments. So thanks very much.
Most people are on mute, but if you want to say something to or ask Denis any questions, just unmute yourself first. I'd just like to ask you, Denis, Kilkenny is different to every other county in that it's, I think, the most rural county in Ireland. So much of what happens in Kilkenny centres on the city itself. A lot of people who work in the city don't necessarily live there. And I'm just wondering how transport can be developed to enable people to work in the city, living outside the city, when the public transport system is as intermittent as it is.
Yeah, a good question. I suppose one of the things that you will look for, I mentioned earlier that there was a significant number of jobs in the city, and we probably don't have the population base within the city to support that. So there is a lot of commuting happens in the city, and whether it be like, so as an employer, like say for instance, State Street, who would be a big employer in the city, and they would have a regional appeal in terms of employment. So there's two ways of tackling that. One is, the commuting patterns then creates its own demand. So for instance, you'll have demand for car parking in the city. If so people come in and park up. So if I'm working in the city for 7 or 8 hours a day, I come in and park up the car and then I go home in the evening. So where should those people park? It'd be a simple question. Should they park up on the high street or so? In terms of retailing, people like, if you have a turnover of car parking in the city centre, that's what you need. So as part of the development plan process, something that we have to do is what's called a local transport plan, which will look at issues around that. So it'll deal with walking, cycling, it'll deal with parking, and it'll deal with public transport. So again, what you'll find is that over the coming years, so last year we commenced the bus service just around Christmas. We had 2 buses, so there's certainly a commitment there from the government to roll that out and keep it going at least for 3 years. But I think what you'll find is there'll probably be an increase in that kind of stuff over the coming years. There'll be additional bus routes. I think also what you'll find is the options of looking at things like park and stride or park and bike will come into play probably. So in other words, if you're commuting into the city, you'll commute so far, and then you'll be asked to get out of your car, park up, and then within the whole concept of a 10-minute city, that you should be able to walk or cycle or wherever to wherever you want to go within the city. So, and just the other side of that then is not forgetting the rural transport. There's also work going on with TII on the, I suppose, expansion of potential rural bus links. So you have things like Ring-a-Link and so on that are there at the moment, and the private operators do come in from the outlying areas like the likes of Callan and Castlecomer. There's regular bus services in from the satellite towns into the city. So, but it's certainly, if you're in a rural area, because of the dispersal in population. Obviously, it's not feasible for everyone to come in on a bus from a rural area, but you'll see rural bus services being improved, or that whole idea of connectivity has to be enhanced for the whole thing to work easily. So that's probably not a simple answer, but like certainly in terms of rural connectivity, that will improve.
Yeah.
But not to the extent that, there's still going to be a demand to travel by car to the city. And that's where, there will be, evolving, I suppose, solutions to that. So whether that's park and ride or park and stride, we're probably not of a scale that park and ride would work to any great extent. That has been looked at before. So if you're driving in from somewhere rural in the county, would you park up at, say, somewhere like Woody's, get out of your car and wait for a bus to bring in another 2 kilometres? Probably not. You'd say, but sure, just keep going.
Yes.
So that's a challenge, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose every plan has to face up to human nature as well as nature. I just looked at some of the words that were used in the plan that's currently being devised might not even have been considered 20 years ago. Words like biodiversity, words like climate change, they're new concepts as far as the planning goes. When you look back on previous plans, can you see what worked and what didn't work?
You can see what worked and what didn't work. I suppose it depends on where you're coming from in terms of perspective. But looking at it from, if just focused on the city, I'd say would be the best or the most obvious examples. So things like the improvement of the public realm,
yes,
the expansion of the city into neighbourhoods. So we've developed, if you go back to Mr. Donnelly and his time as county and city manager, I suppose back in 1977, he had his vision of the city, of the ring road and the infrastructure around that. And I suppose the development of Lochby as the first neighbourhood. And that has been fairly successful, I would say. And then you had the expansion of New Park. So out of that, what we've kind of come full circle in a way. So we have this concept that was brought in back in 2008 of the city and the 4 neighbourhood model. So essentially it's trying to establish 4 neighbourhoods around the city centre probably as an additional neighbourhood. So and I suppose that would be seen as successful. So again, just looking back at the investment that derived in. So if you look at the current roadworks that were going on over off the Callan Road there. So again, the concept of some kind of a compact growth expansion of the city in a planned manner. So when the funding application went in there to the government under its Rebuilding Ireland programme, there was something like 75 applications went in on that into the government. So we came 5th in terms of ticking the boxes. So we got the money. That led to the road is being built, and that's going to open up that side of town now. So we've got, following on from that, 2 new secondary schools planned for the area currently in planning, a new primary school planned for the area currently, the site being devolved to the Department of Education. We have houses currently being built there. We have 2 strategic housing developments in the pipeline to come through aboard Planala, just waiting on those, the processes to go through. That's, the guts of 350 houses, plus what's been built, 2 other planning applications in train at the moment for another 400 houses. So the thing is to get those delivered on the ground. But as the infrastructure is rolled out, that should provide the impetus. So that's where long-term planning is successful. And then just to take the Abbey Quarter as the other kind of flagship project, go back to Joe Crockett's time, and then the concept of actually just buying the Smithick site and what an investment that was. So again, going back to do the master planning and trials and tribulations that were around that. 2 intensive weekends up in the Ormond Hotel back in 2015. We're along with there, but you can see already the investment that's already happened there. Prior, I haven't the figure for it. I think it's about 6 or 7 million, and then another 11 million announced last week to continue that. So, and that's all about, a phrase I'd use about making place in the city and making the city more attractive. And what I call there's themes in the plan about making of place, and the making of place is actually an economic essential, as I would see it, because if you can make the place a nice place to live and work, you'll attract investment. And that's really what you're trying to do, particularly around the city, but also around the other schedules. So the same type of work is going on in Callan, in Thomastown, and the other district towns, to make them better places to live and to attract the investment. So the thing about plan making, identifying the sites where you want the investment, and that's directing private sector investment into those areas.
The Abbey Quarter has huge potential, and in looking at how it's evolving and developing at present, it is just such a pity to see things stall because of the current construction restrictions and all the other restrictions. How much of what is planned for that Abbey Quarter will depend on what the county council can do and what the private sector has to do in order to make it viable?
I suppose, so just to put it fairly clear, to make the distinction. So the development of the Abbey Quarter has been handed to the partnership, as they call it. So the Abbey Quarter Partnership, which is kind of I think it's a 50-50 split between the NTMA and the council. So the council brought the sites, the land, and the NTMA are bringing the funding through loans and so on. So what the rest of the site, and that's, I think, about 60% of the site remains in public ownership. So that'll be the street, the public park, the linear park, all that stuff. And that was what was the latest announcement was about. So that investment is going to happen. So what you'll see over time there later this year, you'll see the skate park and a bit of the linear park being developed, rolled out, and then probably into next year you'll see work starting on the rest of the public ground there. So the urban park around the Abbey itself. And that's so in terms of the rest of the site then, where the sites, if you like, I think there's 7 parcels within that plan area currently devolved to the partnership. So it'll be up to the partnership to develop those in whatever way, they try to develop those in terms of commercial return. So the NTMA are looking for a commercial return on this, like they're not getting the money for free. So someone going into the building down there has to pay a rent, or whatever they build in terms of, say, housing. People have to pay a rent to fund it, or to pay back the loans. So what I'm saying is that's up to the partnership, and like they do that themselves. They have their own board of directors, and there's a chief executive there working on that. But they are confined. I'd say, well, confined is probably the wrong word, but there's a vision set out there in the master plan and in the urban design strategy. So, for instance, there's a certain percentage of uses identified there. So 30% needs to go towards housing, 30% towards, I think it's office and employment use and so on. I can't remember the exact figures. So what you're trying to do there is make a mixed use place for people to live and work and do their business. So does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes, yes,
yeah.
I think it does, insofar as it's possible. I mean,
yes. So what will happen? So let's say, if just as roll on 2 years, maybe we have the TUSC coming to start in January 2022, I think. So Kilkenny will be making a pitch to get some kind of a presence, a physical presence in Kilkenny, and that could be, in there could be a good starting point. But whether that happens or not, well, that's another day's work. But that's the sort of stuff that you'd be looking at.
I'm going to ask if anyone else has any questions that they'd like to put to Denis in relation to the county development plan. if you have any questions, just unmute yourself.
Ian?
Yes, please.
Denis, thanks for that. Have you seen a new reality from Department of Environment in terms of more stringent guidelines for yourselves in developing development plans?
Well, they're long awaited, John.
Yeah.
We've been told that we're getting new guidelines on development plans. So the old ones I think are 2008 or something like that. So yeah, definitely. So what you find is, if you go to look at a lot of development plans, just the sheer volume of them. So I would take so I just say we've 2 volumes, which are not too bad, and then you have a waft of appendices which do the dirty work. So if I don't want to be singling out any local authority, but as an example, if you just go look at the Wexford County Council's draft development plan, it runs to something like 490 something pages. So how someone could actually, take up that document, and now I'm not saying we're any better. Ours runs to 200 and I think it's 280 or 290 odd. So you usually start the process with trying to, how do I make the plan smaller from the last time?
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of repetition in development plans, from chapter to chapter. So it's trying to get around that and just make it an easier document to work with. So it's important that, just come back to the question Ian asked at the start about being aspirational and being, more, how do you say, more active. So what you're trying to do is move to a situation where your objectives are that old acronym SMART, measurable, achievable, and time-based. So when you come to do your report after 2 years and say, well, how much of this plan has been implemented? That's where that kind of stuff kicks in then. So there's not much point in putting in something like, it's an objective of the council to liaise with Irish Water to ensure blah, blah, blah. So how do you measure that objective? Well, how many times did you phone Irish Water to see where it's just not practical. So it's how the thing is written is important. So we're still waiting on those guidelines, but if you look at some of the submissions that come in, we got 1 or 2 saying, well, it was nice and short, or it was easy to read, or whatever. So we're trying to get there anyway in that sense.
Very good, thanks.
In relation to the plan itself, when it's published, how can members of the public access it? I was looking at the website and I see there are 3 volumes available at €100 each.
Yes.
That's for the hard printed copy. Will they be available online?
Yes, they're always available online, so you just have to download them. And they're available free to download. So the draft plans and the historical stuff as well. So the last plan, the plan before that, they're all there on the website somewhere. You might have to search a bit to get them, but they're there.
Yeah.
So how will they be available? Yeah, it as people get more familiar with using computers and internet and all that kind of stuff. So we don't get a lot of demand for hard copies anymore. So I think we printed 100 copies of the draft. So most of those went to kind of like, there wasn't too many, I think 3 or 4 people that members of the public. And then we gave them to councillors, all right, for some, just sort of courtesy, so councillors get a copy. And other than that, we don't, and they are expensive. So €100 doesn't cover the cost actually.
Gosh, yes.
They're expensive, especially when you're printing them in color and all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
so,
but it's a major incentive to download them.
Yeah, it's a major. So we'll always have some spare copies, and we will print off a run, and because there are people who would like, and I'm a bit like that myself. I like to have something to hold in my hand when I'm looking at stuff. Yeah, it's mainly through internet and downloadings and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I suppose one of the most interesting developments will be when it eventually is allowed to start, is the development of the library in the old Mayfair site. and that will be a major public resource when it gets started. How much of the plan is the plan likely to be completed within the 7 years that it's been allocated, taking COVID into account?
So when you say the plan, do you mean the every quarter plan, or do you mean
No, I'm
the
thinking of the
development
county
plan itself?
development plan, which has from 2021 to 2017.
Yeah, it's probably unlikely that every objective in the plan would be completed. But there'll be a few major tick box over the library would be one. So there'll be infrastructure projects. So for instance, we have an objective in there to complete the ring road from the Castlecombe Road over to the Freshford Road.
Yes.
So that's most unlikely that will be done within the 7 years, because that's going back to first principles in terms of planning. So it has to go through planning consent and funding and all that kind of stuff.
Of course.
So that's one objective that's unlikely to be completed, but it is an important, I'd say, back to an aspiration. It's an important aspiration that as a city and council would want to see achieved. So, but I would say something like the library, that'll definitely be achieved. So that'll start sometime later in the year once the COVID restrictions are lifted.
Right.
And it'll be a great boost, yeah.
I see John Hurley from the Kilkenny Chamber of Commerce would like to ask something. Hello, John.
Yes, thanks, Ian, and thanks, Denis, for your presentation. Indeed, prior to this, you've made many presentations on this as part of the public consultation process, and you ran a series of online engagements where the public was invited to hear about it and indeed put forward questions, and that you had very good attendance at those meetings, as much as nearly 100 people at each, which I think would be stronger attendance than would have been traditional, where we were in pre-COVID and pre-Zoom meetings and all of that. And I see that you have, at the end of it all, received something like 450 plus submissions. How does that compare? What are your thoughts or your views in relation to the public consultation and their engagement with the process? Would you see that as having been a success, or what's your view on it?
Yeah, so definitely viewing it as a success, John. So you're dead right. We just had four public engagements. The figures, were roughly around what I think the max on the one night was 80 plus, but it varied a little bit. Even during the night, it might started off at 60, dropped down to 50. People were coming in and out of the session. So we had quite a few more than those numbers actually registered, and some would have come in and out of the session at the time. It was whether it was the anonymity of the thing, but people seem to be better engaged in it. So if we typically going back, if we'd gone to a local hall or a public hotel, a room in a hotel, and invited people into it, if you got 30 to 40 people into the room, you'd be doing well. So the numbers that attended the online sessions were better, purely in that respect. And also, I suppose, in a public forum, people are a little bit more reticent to stand up and put up their hand and say the question. Whereas what was happening on the night was people were talking away and I was answering questions, but there was also a chat facility going on where people were writing in questions and they were being answered by the team in the background. So it was very good engagement that way, and I think everybody that participated in it, and I know you attended a couple of them, John, as well, could see what the reaction was going on, and say also helped, I think, that we had an independent chair on it, so at least the perception that it wasn't completely run by the local authority. I mean, it's hosted by the local authority, but John Purcell did an excellent job in chairing the sessions and making sure that everyone's what was left in and people that were asking questions got their opportunity. So yeah, no, very successful, and I think from now on we'll certainly there'll be a major focus on using the internet and that kind of format as part of the public consultation. But that's not forgetting that there will also be, the traditional town hall type meeting or event meeting. It'll be a mixture of the two going forward, presuming that we get rid of COVID.
Denis, could I just ask you to stop sharing your screen so that we can have a look at you?
Oh, sorry,
No, you're fine. And
I didn't
Jason
realize.
would like to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks, Denis. Very interesting presentation. I did enjoy the virtual plan. Once you got your head around it and navigating it, it was quite good. So well done to all involved for that. My question is, 450 odd submissions. Should each of those expect some form of response and further negotiation, or is it just now over to the hands of the chief executive and the councillors to decide?
Yeah, so there isn't an engagement in that sense. So we don't correspond with everybody. So what is important to us is that there's some kind of transparency in the way the thing is handled. So everyone that wrote in, they'll be assigned a reference number. So they should be able to trace the progress of their submission. So when it comes to the chief executive's report, it'll be, Jason Dempsey, reference, what were the issues that Jason raised? These are the issues. What's the chief executive's recommendation? And then that goes to the council. So you'll be able to say, well, what happened when I wrote in there about whatever it was? What happened to it? So you should be able to trace your name through the system, and then see, well, it accepted or it didn't. We was also going to actually brought in, see exactly if we wanted a clarification, say what does it actually mean there? Can't follow it, but there's not too much. It's pretty well out. This back to decide.
Hi.
Thank you, Denis.
About that, did you get cut off for a moment?
Me? No.
Right. Sorry about that. I got my internet went down, so I'm not sure if everyone got cut off or were able to remain on.
No. I could see Jason anyway, so it was okay.
Ian, can I come in briefly? Dermot Gaynor here. Denis, thanks for your time today. Very much appreciated. I think I saw job creation as one of the 6 themes. I hadn't had the time to go through the plan. Will the plan have specific objectives around job creation? And can you give us any sense today as to initiatives within the plan to enable and facilitate job creation?
Okay, but sir, I suppose the first thing, just to remember that it's a spatial document. It's not necessarily about the activity of support and jobs in that sense. So as part of the council's remit, on the other side of the house, we have the local economic and community plan, which is the LEO office, which does all that kind of day-to-day work. So what you're doing is trying to identify, areas where you want investment in jobs. So Kilkenny City is obviously the big one, district towns, the port down in Bellevue, all that. So you'll look at the plan and you'll see there's loads of provision there around just land area, first of all, and then to get the infrastructure around that to support. So if I do want to come to invest, well, what's the infrastructure like in these places? So over the years, the port had deficiencies in infrastructure, had deficiencies in water supply, for instance, had deficiencies in wastewater treatment. They've been more or less solved, had deficiencies in access. So all that's been solved over the last 10 to 15 years. So we've got the motorways in, we have the wastewater treatment plant for water cities down there. The water supply has been solved through investment with the IDA. So that type of stuff. So that's what you'll see in the plan. There isn't specific initiative around, we're going to do X, and that's down, say, to the LEO office, who looks after medium and small enterprises. And then on the other side of it, you have the IDA, and we would liaise with those. So the IDA have invested more money in Bellevue. So they've bought another parcel of land there. So that was in discussion with them. We've sold that for industrial and have a planning application for access roads there with us at the moment. And what you're trying to do then is, in the development plan, is target the area. So we've identified, like, there's 5 or 6 areas, and then to supplement that. So for instance, You talked about the industrial stuff, the zoned land. We've targeted third level education. So there's an objective in there to try and support that objective through the Abbey Quarter. So it's the physical side of it. Certainly there's supports in there. So the operations side is more left to like Fiona Gaynor, Fiona Deacon in the Leo office and so on.
Okay, thanks, Dennis, for that clarification. Yeah, it's about developing the infrastructure.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, if there's nobody else that has any questions, I'd like to thank Denis for not just for the time that you put into this, but for the way that you've presented it and making the county development plan so accessible. And I can only wish you and your colleagues every success in achieving all that the plan sets out to do. Perhaps when the plan is approved and slimmed down somewhat, and you know what you're actually going to include in it, you might come back to us and talk with us again about what we can really expect in the next couple of years.
Okay, that's no bother, yeah.
Great. I'd like to thank you, Denis.
Nice to that.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. And thanks to Councillor Martin Brett for initiating this conversation. Next week, we're going to be joined by Blaise Smith. Blaise is an artist based in Kilkenny, and his work will soon be on display in the Butler Gallery. And Blaise will be talking to us about his work and about what we can expect when the Butler Gallery opens up with his exhibition. He's one of Ireland's foremost artists, and we're lucky enough to have him living in Kilkenny. So we'll see you all next week, and I look forward to our conversation then. Look after yourselves in the meantime. Thank you, Denis.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye now.